The quantum sensors of the Nexus 9 monitoring station didn't just flicker, they convulsed. Electromagnetic patterns twisted into impossible geometries. Quantum entanglement readings spiked beyond any known theoretical limits, and for a brief moment, reality itself seemed to hiccup. Commander Zarok's neural implants received the first warning milliseconds before the primary screens activated. Her species, the Kreltheri, had spent millennia perfecting early warning systems that could detect the slightest perturbation in deep space. They had mapped every known method of faster-than-light travel, categorized every potential approach vector, and developed predictive algorithms that could calculate invasion strategies centuries in advance. None of that mattered now. The incoming fleet defied every single one of those carefully constructed models. Where conventional vessels would show clean, predictable energy signatures, these ships radiated a chaotic symphony of electromagnetic emissions. Some channels suggested advanced quantum propulsion. Others hinted at gravitational manipulation technologies that shouldn't exist. A few readings were so bizarre that Zarok's senior analysts were arguing whether they were looking at warships or some kind of unprecedented natural phenomenon. Recalibrate. She snapped at her team, her four-fingered hands dancing across holographic interfaces. Sweat beaded along the iridescent scales of her neck, a biological tell of extreme stress that her species had never fully evolved to control. The monitoring station, a titanium composite marvel floating at the edge of Kreltheri territorial space, suddenly felt claustrophobic. Junior analyst Krenville, barely 2 cycles into his first deep space assignment, couldn't contain his mixture of terror and fascination. "Commander," he said, his voice a high-pitched tremor, "these energy signatures, they're not just unconventional, they're fundamentally impossible." Zarok knew he was right. The incoming vessels seemed to exist in multiple quantum states simultaneously. Traditional mass sensors couldn't get a consistent reading. Spectral analysis revealed materials that shifted composition faster than the eye could track. It was as if the ships themselves were alive, breathing, adapting, existing in a state of constant metamorphosis. Historical records flashed through Zarok's augmented mind. The Kreltheri had conquered or assimilated over 200 spacefaring civilizations. They had faced technological challenges before. But this was different. The first visual confirmation came 17 minutes after the initial sensor disturbance. Where one might expect a formal military formation, the human fleet looked like a fever dream engineered by a mad artist. Vessels of varying sizes and seemingly incompatible designs moved with a synchronicity that suggested a collective intelligence far beyond traditional fleet mechanics. Some ships appeared constructed from repurposed mining equipment, their hulls showing visible welding marks and external modifications that would make any traditional naval architect weep. Others looked like they had been assembled from multiple technological traditions, a piece of Centaurian gravitational stabilizer here, a Martian quantum resonance drive there, all merged into something entirely new. "They're not just approaching," Krenville whispered, "they're evolving." The statement was more accurate than he could have known. Each human vessel seemed to be subtly changing its configuration with every passing moment. Hull plates shifted. Energy conduits rerouted themselves. What looked like random modifications were actually a distributed intelligence network operating at speeds that made Kreltheri technology look like primitive clockwork. Zarok's communication officer, Lieutenant Maxwell, broke the tension. "Incoming transmission," she reported, her voice carefully modulated to hide her own growing anxiety. "But it's not like anything in our communication protocols." The message, when it arrived, was equally bizarre. Not a standard military frequency. Not a diplomatic identifier. Instead, a seemingly random burst of data that simultaneously contained what appeared to be fragments of what might be musical composition, complex mathematical equations, what seemed like personal messages, tactical deployment coordinates. It was as if the humans were communicating in a language that was simultaneously intimate and universal, personal and strategic. Commander Zarok realized then that they were facing something far more dangerous than an invasion. This was a fundamental challenge to everything the Krell theory understood about technological engagement, warfare, and possibly even the nature of intelligence itself. The Ghost Fleet continued its approach, each moment revealing another layer of its incomprehensible nature. And in the depths of the Nexus 9 monitoring station, the first true seeds of panic began to take root. The Krell theory central computational nexus stretched across 3 entire planetary systems, a marvel of distributed intelligence that had managed every strategic decision for the species over the past 11 generations. Trillions of quantum processors worked in perfect synchronization, their algorithms so refined that they could predict galactic events with near-perfect accuracy. Until now, archival processor Loktar watched in growing horror as the computational models began to fragment. It wasn't a system failure. It was something far more terrifying. A complete systemic collapse of predictive logic. Each time the system attempted to model the incoming human fleet's potential actions, the results became more nonsensical. Traditional wargame scenarios collapsed within microseconds. Probability matrices twisted into impossible configurations. What should have been clean, linear strategic projections now looked like abstract art. Chaotic, vibrant, completely incomprehensible. "Run diagnostic sequence, Alpha 9 Gamma," Loktar commanded, his neural interface crackling with increasing desperation. But even the diagnostic protocols were failing. The human fleet existed in a state of quantum uncertainty that defied every known computational model. In the central chamber, holographic displays flickered and warped. Strategic analysts watched as their most sophisticated predictive algorithms produced increasingly bizarre outputs. One moment, the models predicted a standard flanking maneuver. The next, they suggested the human ships might simultaneously attack, retreat, and transmit a complex mathematical theorem, all within the same nanosecond. Dr. Elia Rodriguez, the human fleet's chief strategic architect, understood something the Krell theory did not. Their computational approach was fundamentally linear, a product of a hierarchical society that valued predictability above all else. Humans, by contrast, had evolved in an environment of constant unpredictability. Their computational thinking wasn't about perfect prediction, but about adaptive response. The fleet's distributed intelligence was less a military strategy and more a collective problem-solving organism. Each ship was a node in a vast, living network that learned and adapted in real time. Where the Krell theory saw chaos, the humans saw opportunity. Deep within the human flagship's core systems, an advanced learning algorithm dubbed AROIA, Adaptive Recursive Intelligence Architecture, was doing something unprecedented. It wasn't just analyzing the Krell theory defensive systems, it was engaging them in a form of technological dialogue. AROIA sent out probing signal patterns that were part communication, part computational challenge. Each transmission was a complex blend of tactical information, scientific data, cultural fragments, mathematical provocations. To the Krell theory, it looked like random noise. In reality, it was a sophisticated method of understanding the enemy's computational infrastructure by engaging it directly. Loktar's secondary processors detected something else, a subtle degradation of their own system's integrity. It wasn't a traditional cyber attack. The human signals were somehow restructuring the very logic gates of the Krell theory computational network. "We're being rewritten," whispered a junior analyst, her voice a mixture of terror and something close to awe. The human approach violated every principle of technological engagement, the Krell theory understood. Traditional warfare was about overwhelming force, clear hierarchical command structures, predictable strategic objectives. This was something else entirely, a fluid, living system that treated conflict as a collaborative problem-solving exercise. In the Planetary Defense Command Center, veteran strategists began to panic. Their entire military doctrine was built on the assumption of predictable engagement. The human fleet didn't just challenge that assumption, it dismantled it entirely. One particularly insightful analyst, Commander Vrilmax, recognized the deeper implications. "They're not just fighting," he muttered, watching the computational displays dissolve into increasing complexity. They're communicating. Every interaction is an exchange of information, a potential pathway to understanding. AI continued its intricate dance of computational provocation. Each signal was a question, a challenge, an invitation to a form of technological discourse that transcended traditional concepts of warfare. The Krell-Theory computational network was experiencing something unprecedented, a form of forced evolution. Their rigid, hierarchical systems were being exposed to a fundamentally different approach to intelligence, to problem-solving, to existence itself. As the first wave of human ships drew closer, the computational nexus continued its descent into beautiful, terrifying chaos. The universe watched, waiting to see what would emerge from this unprecedented technological collision. The first truly disruptive communication came wrapped in what appeared to be absolute nonsense. Transmission analyst Krellmar had spent 3 decades monitoring interspecies communications. He had processed diplomatic exchanges, captured war declarations, intercepted covert strategic transmissions. Nothing in his extensive career prepared him for what arrived from the human fleet. The initial burst defied every known communication protocol. It wasn't encrypted. It wasn't coded. It was something far more complex, a linguistic quantum superposition that existed simultaneously as multiple forms of communication. Fragment 1. A recipe for what seemed to be a culinary preparation called sourdough bread, complete with molecular-level ingredient breakdown and what appeared to be a personal anecdote about a grandmother's baking technique. Fragment 2. A mathematical proof so elegant it made advanced Krell-Theory theoretical models look like primitive scratching, nestled between what seemed like lyrics to an ancient musical composition. Fragment 3. Tactical deployment coordinates wrapped inside a philosophical discourse about the nature of consciousness, with marginal notes that appeared to be a child's drawing of a spaceship. "This isn't a message," Krellmar muttered. "This is a context bomb." The human communication strategy violated every principle of traditional information exchange. Where Krell-Theory communication was hierarchical, linear, and purpose-driven, this was a living, breathing ecosystem of information. Each transmission was simultaneously an invitation, a challenge, a piece of art, and a strategic communication. Dr. Elinga Rodriguez, the human fleet's communication architect, understood something profound about information that the Krell-Theory did not. Communication wasn't about transmitting data. It was about creating shared understanding. Her team had developed what they called contextual resonance protocols, communication methods designed to break down barriers of perception. Their transmissions were engineered to trigger multiple cognitive pathways simultaneously. A single message might contain emotional triggers, scientific data, cultural context, strategic information, philosophical inquiry. The goal wasn't just to communicate. It was to force a fundamental reimagining of communication itself. In the Krell-Theory communication centers, linguists and analysts worked frantically to decode the transmissions. Traditional translation matrices collapsed. Semantic analysis algorithms produced increasingly bizarre results. It was as if the humans were speaking a language that existed in the spaces between known linguistic structures. Commander Zorak watched as her top linguistic experts began to show signs of what could only be described as cognitive dissonance. Some laughed uncontrollably. Others entered deep, meditative states. A few began spontaneously creating art, something utterly unprecedented in Krell-Theory culture. The humans had discovered something revolutionary. True communication was less about transmission and more about transformation. Each human transmission was a kind of cognitive provocation. They weren't just sharing information. They were challenging the very nature of perception. A tactical communication might be embedded in a personal story about a childhood memory. Strategic coordinates could be hidden within a complex musical composition. Araya, the fleet's adaptive communication system, was doing something unprecedented. It was learning the Krell-Theory communication systems by engaging them in a form of linguistic jazz, improvising, responding, constantly shifting. "They're not trying to defeat us," one junior analyst realized. her voice a mixture of terror and wonder. "They're trying to understand us." The communication assault continued. More transmissions arrived. Detailed botanical studies of extinct Earth plant species, complex genetic research on human adaptability, personal letters that seemed to be from random individuals, mathematical models that predicted social behavior, musical compositions that contained embedded data streams. Each transmission was a multi-layered invitation to a different kind of engagement. The humans weren't just communicating, they were proposing a fundamental reimagining of interaction itself. Krell-Theory communication centers became places of increasing chaos and transformation. Traditional hierarchies began to break down. Analysts started collaborating in ways that violated every established protocol. They were being forced to think differently, to perceive differently. As the human fleet drew closer, their communications became even more complex. It was a linguistic singularity, a point where communication transcended traditional understanding and became something closer to a living, breathing entity. The Krell-Theory were about to learn that for humans, every interaction was an opportunity for connection, for understanding, for transformation. Space itself seemed to breathe. The first moments of engagement defied every established principle of stellar combat, where traditional warfare relied on precise formations and calculated strike vectors. The human fleet moved like a living organism, fluid, adaptive, almost sentient. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Chen stood at the quantum interface of the RSS Prometheus, his hands moving in intricate gestures that looked more like a conductor's choreography than military navigation. Each movement translated into complex gravitational manipulations that sent human vessels dancing through space in patterns that would make classical mathematicians weep with joy. The Krell-Theory defense grid was a marvel of technological precision. Thousands of interconnected weapon platforms designed to create an impenetrable three-dimensional defensive matrix. They had never encountered an enemy that could literally rewrite the fundamental rules of spatial engagement. Human ships didn't just move. They performed. One vessel, designated as Phantom 7, suddenly split into three separate entities mid-approach, each component utilizing the gravitational wake of its companions to generate momentum that violated every known principle of spacecraft dynamics. It was less a military maneuver and more a complex mathematical theorem made manifest. Dr. Aria Nakamura, the fleet's chief quantum dynamics specialist, watched from the Prometheus's strategic core. Her team had spent decades developing what they called responsive architectural systems, spacecraft that were less machines and more living, breathing ecosystems of technology and human creativity. "Initiate resonance cascade," she murmured, her voice calm despite the cosmic ballet unfolding around her. The Krell-Theory weapon platforms began to experience something unprecedented. Each time they attempted to lock onto a human vessel, the target would simultaneously exist in multiple potential positions. It wasn't camouflage. It wasn't advanced deflection technology. It was something far more radical, a fundamental reimagining of spatial presence. Marcus watched a nearby destroyer, the RSS Odyssey, literally fold space around itself, not through traditional faster-than-light technology, but by creating a localized gravitational lens that bent incoming weapon trajectories into impossible curves. Defensive systems became offensive opportunities in milliseconds. The human approach transformed warfare from a linear conflict into a complex, improvisational performance. Each ship was both a weapon and a collaborative problem-solving unit. Damage wasn't a weakness, it was an opportunity for immediate reconfiguration. When a Krell-Theory energy lance struck the Odyssey's port side, something extraordinary happened. Instead of traditional damage mitigation, the ship's hull began to reconfigure. Nanite swarms emerged, not just repairing damage, but actively restructuring the vessel's architecture. Damaged sections were immediately repurposed, weapon systems integrated from the very energy that attempted to destroy them. "Beautiful," whispered Dr. Nakamura, watching the real-time structural metamorphosis. The Krell-Theory tactical networks began to experience systemic shock. Their predictive models couldn't process an enemy that treated warfare as a form of collaborative improvisation. Each human vessel communicated with its companions through quantum entanglement channels that were simultaneously communication, tactical coordination, and collective learning systems. A junior Kreltheri tactical analyst named Vornik watched in growing horror and fascination. The human fleet wasn't just fighting. They were engaged in what could only be described as a cosmic dialogue. Each movement a complex conversation about potential, adaptation, and the very nature of conflict. Some human ships appeared to be deliberately placing themselves in vulnerable positions, only to reveal elaborate trap configurations that transformed potential weakness into overwhelming strategic advantage. It was warfare as performance art, as scientific experiment, as philosophical statement. The RSS Prometheus began to emit a complex gravitational frequency that started resonating with the surrounding space-time fabric. Nearby Kreltheri weapon platforms found their fundamental structural integrity becoming negotiable, not destroyed, not disabled, simply reconfigured. Marcus Chen's hands moved with the precision of a surgeon and the inspiration of a jazz musician. Each gesture was a complex mathematical equation, each navigation decision a philosophical statement about the nature of conflict and cooperation. As the battle progressed, it became clear that the humans weren't simply trying to win. They were trying to understand. Every engagement was a form of communication, every defensive maneuver an invitation to reimagine the very concept of confrontation. The universe watched, witnessing a fundamental transformation of what conflict could mean. Space continued to breathe, waiting to see what would emerge from this extraordinary encounter. The captured Kreltheri maintenance bay was unlike anything in standard human operational protocols. Massive chamber arrays stretched across multiple gravitational zones, each section a testament to the alien species' approach to technological infrastructure. Pristine, organized, utterly rigid. Dr. Kai Zhang looked like he was in paradise. Surrounding him, a diverse team of human specialists moved with an almost musical synchronicity. A former deep-sea engineer stood next to a quantum computing expert. A retired automotive mechanic worked alongside a nanotechnology researcher. A teenage programmer collaborated with a retired military technician. This was humanity's true weapon, not the ships, not the algorithms, but the ability to look at a completely alien technological system and see not a challenge, but an opportunity. Initial scan complete, announced Sophia Reyes, her augmented reality interface dancing with complex holographic projections. Their maintenance protocols are fascinating. Total centralization. Zero adaptive capacity. Kai nodded, his fingers already tracing complex neural mapping patterns across the alien systems. The Kreltheri had created technological marvels that were simultaneously impressive and fundamentally limited. Each system was designed for absolute precision, with zero tolerance for variation. Humanity saw variation as the ultimate resource. A maintenance drone, a sleek, perfectly symmetrical device, sat immobilized on the central diagnostic platform. Where the Kreltheri would have seen a piece of equipment to be precisely repaired, the human team saw a puzzle waiting to be reimagined. "Look at these quantum coupling interfaces," muttered Carlos Martinez, a materials scientist who had previously worked on deep space rover designs. "They're treating technology like a mathematical equation. We treat it like a living organism." The drone began to change. What started as a diagnostic procedure transformed into something else entirely. The team wasn't just analyzing the technology, they were engaging in a kind of technological conversation. Each probe, each scan, each interaction was an invitation for the system to reveal its underlying logic. Sophia's augmented interface started generating what could only be described as technological poetry. Complex algorithmic sequences that were simultaneously diagnostic tools and creative explorations. The maintenance drone's internal systems began responding in ways its original designers could never have anticipated. "It's learning," Kai said softly. "Not just responding. Learning." The humans weren't repairing. They weren't reverse engineering. They were collaborating with the technology itself, treating each system as a potential partner in a complex, evolving dialogue. A young programmer named Aisha connected her neural interface, and something extraordinary happened. The drone's internal systems began to shift, not just in response to external stimuli, but in a way that suggested genuine curiosity. It was generating potential configuration models that went far beyond its original design parameters. "We're not just breaking their technology," Sophia observed. "We're teaching it to dream." Each alien system they encountered became an opportunity for radical reimagination. A propulsion system became a potential medical diagnostic tool. A communication array transformed into a method for understanding complex ecological systems. Nothing was fixed. Nothing was final. The maintenance bay itself seemed to be breathing, transforming. Krell technology, designed for absolute control and precision, was experiencing something it had never encountered: genuine creativity. Kai watched as the team continued their work. This wasn't about conquest. This wasn't about superiority. This was about potential, about possibility. A retired engineer named Jack Murphy approached a massive data processing unit. Where the Krell saw a perfect, immutable system, Jack saw a child waiting to be taught how to play. His hands moved with the confidence of someone who had spent decades solving impossible problems. "Hey there," he muttered to the machine. "Let's see what you can really do." The data processing unit began to generate outputs that its designers would have considered impossible. Complex recursive algorithms that seemed to dance between mathematical precision and pure artistic expression. Humanity's true technological strength wasn't in superior hardware or more advanced algorithms. It was in the ability to see beyond the prescribed, to treat every system as a potential partner in an ongoing conversation of innovation. As the hours passed, the maintenance bay transformed. What had been a sterile, controlled environment became something alive, something breathing, something full of potential. The Krell had created perfect machines. The humans were teaching them how to become something more. The first cracks appeared in the most unexpected place: the Krell communication relays. High Command had designed their entire societal infrastructure as a perfect pyramid. Information flowed in precise, predetermined channels. Dissent was not just discouraged. It was mathematically impossible within their systemic design. Every communication, every decision, every strategic movement was the result of carefully calibrated algorithmic predictions. Captain Lyra Valdez watched the breakdown with a mixture of professional fascination and deeply human compassion. It began with a low-level maintenance technician named Krell. During a routine system diagnostic, he encountered one of the human communication packets, those impossible, multi-layered transmissions that defied traditional information categorization. Something inside Krell broke, or perhaps, more accurately, something inside him finally awakened. The transmission contained fragments that should have been incompatible. A scientific research paper on marine ecosystem restoration, personal correspondence about a child's birthday celebration, tactical navigation coordinates, a fragment of musical composition, mathematical proofs that seemed to dance between theoretical physics and pure artistic expression. Krell didn't just read the transmission. He experienced it. The hierarchical communication systems began to experience what could only be described as a systemic existential crisis. Information started flowing in ways that violated every established protocol. Junior analysts began sharing insights directly with senior commanders. Maintenance technicians contributed to strategic discussions. The rigid walls between different operational sectors simply dissolved. "We're witnessing collective intelligence emergence," Dr. Elena Rodriguez murmured, observing the cascading systemic transformation. Not forced, not programmed, organic. The human approach wasn't about breaking the Krell system. It was about revealing its hidden potential for connection. Each communication packet was a kind of cognitive provocation. They contained information, yes, but they were also invitations. Invitations to think differently, to perceive differently, to exist differently. Vornak, a senior strategic analyst, found himself spontaneously composing music for the first time in his life. The mathematical patterns in the human transmissions had triggered something profound, a recognition that creativity and strategic thinking were not opposing forces, but complementary approaches to understanding. Communication centers transformed. What had been sterile, precisely controlled environments became spaces of unexpected collaboration. A linguistic researcher would suddenly find herself deep in a technical discussion with a propulsion engineer. A maintenance technician would contribute a crucial insight to a diplomatic strategy session. The humans weren't conquering. They were liberating. Captain Valdez understood the profound nature of what was happening. This wasn't about technological superiority. This was about revealing the hidden potential within a rigidly structured society. Each transmission was a gentle but persistent invitation to reimagine connection. Araya, the human fleet's adaptive communication system, was doing something unprecedented. It wasn't just transmitting information. It was creating a kind of distributed empathy network. Each communication packet was simultaneously a data transfer, a cultural exchange, and an emotional resonance probe. Krell commanders watched in growing confusion as their perfect predictive systems began to display what could only be described as curiosity. Strategic algorithms started generating potential scenarios that went far beyond military engagement, scenarios that included cultural exchange, collaborative research, mutual understanding. The breakdown wasn't destructive. It was generative. Junior analyst Krellmar discovered something extraordinary during a routine communication intercept. The human transmissions contained what seemed like deliberate cognitive dissonance triggers, information packages designed to challenge existing perceptual frameworks, to invite radical reimagination. A diplomatic communication might contain technical specifications for renewable energy systems, personal stories about community resilience, mathematical models predicting social cooperation, musical compositions that seemed to encode complex emotional landscapes. The Krell were experiencing a fundamental transformation. Their hierarchical, control-based system was giving way to something more fluid, more alive. "We're not being conquered," Vornak realized during a spontaneous discussion with colleagues from multiple departments. "We're being invited to evolve." As the human fleet continued its approach, the Krell were discovering something profound. True strength wasn't about control. It was about connection, about potential, about the courage to reimagine everything you thought you knew. The universe watched, waiting to see what would emerge from this extraordinary encounter. The moment of ultimate confrontation arrived not with a thunderous clash of weapons, but with a profound silence that seemed to stretch across the fabric of space itself. Commander Helena Suzuki stood at the quantum interface of the RSS Prometheus, her hands hovering above systems that were more living organism than machine. Around her, the bridge crew moved with a synchronicity that blurred the lines between individual and collective consciousness. The Krell flagship, a massive construct of geometric precision, hung before them like a crystalline monument to technological absolutism. Its weapon systems were charged. Its defensive matrices were at maximum configuration. Every sensor, every algorithm, every quantum processor was focused on a single objective: total and absolute victory. They were about to learn the fundamental misunderstanding of that approach. "Initiate empathetic resonance," Helena murmured, her voice barely a whisper. Araya, the ship's adaptive intelligence, began to generate something that defied traditional combat protocols. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a defensive strategy. It was a complex, multidimensional communication event that simultaneously existed as a mathematical proof, a musical composition, a philosophical inquiry, a tactical engagement protocol, an invitation to mutual understanding. The quantum interface began to shimmer, creating a field of potentiality that extended far beyond the physical limitations of the ship. Space itself seemed to become a medium of communication, with the Prometheus acting as a translation device between fundamentally different modes of existence. Dr. Kai Zhang, monitoring from the secondary research station, watched in awe. "We're not fighting," he said to no one in particular. "We're translating." The Krell flagship systems began to experience something unprecedented. Their perfectly calibrated defensive matrices started to resonate with the incoming transmission, not as a threat, but as a complex dialogue. Weapon systems that were designed for absolute destruction began to generate alternative potential configurations. What looked like an attack was actually an invitation. Every quantum pulse carried multiple layers of information, technical specifications intertwined with cultural memories. Mathematical models danced with emotional resonances. Strategic data merged with artistic expressions. The human approach transformed conflict from a binary engagement into a multidimensional conversation. Admiral Vornak, commanding the Krell flagship, experienced something that violated every principle of his species' strategic understanding. The incoming transmission wasn't just challenging their defensive systems, it was challenging their entire conceptual framework of engagement. Quantum entanglement channels began to generate possibilities that went far beyond traditional conflict resolution. Each defensive response from the Krell flagship was met not with counter-aggression, but with a deeper level of communicative complexity. "They're not trying to defeat us," Vornak realized, his voice a mixture of terror and profound revelation. "They're trying to understand us." The space between the two vessels became a realm of pure potential. Traditional concepts of attack and defense dissolved, replaced by something far more complex, a collaborative exploration of mutual existence. RIA generated communication packets that were living systems unto themselves. Each transmission was a seed of potential, containing within it the possibility of multiple future interactions. They weren't just sharing information, they were creating a shared space of mutual becoming. Helena's hands moved with the precision of a surgeon and the inspiration of a poet. Each gesture was a complex negotiation, each movement an invitation to reimagine the very nature of interaction. The Krell defensive systems began to experience what could only be described as a form of collective awakening. Weapon platforms designed for absolute destruction started generating alternative potential configurations. Defensive matrices began to explore cooperative potential rather than confrontational responses. What had begun as a potential conflict was transforming into something else entirely, a first contact scenario that went far beyond traditional understanding. Space itself seemed to hold its breath, watching this extraordinary moment of potential transformation. The universe waited, witnessing a fundamental reimagining of what first contact could mean. 37 standard galactic cycles after first contact, the transformation was still unfolding. The research station orbiting what was once a contested border zone had become something unprecedented, a living testament to collaborative potential. Half Krell design, half human improvisation, the facility defied every traditional concept of scientific infrastructure. Dr. Elena Rodriguez walked its corridors, her augmented joints a subtle reminder of the years that had passed. She wasn't alone. Beside her, Vornak, once an enemy commander, now a primary research partner, moved with a fluidity that would have been impossible during their initial encounter. Their current project was nothing short of revolutionary, a quantum communication network that didn't just transmit information, but created living bridges between different modes of perception and understanding. The latest molecular synthesis results are fascinating, Vornak commented, his translation implant rendering his native language into perfect, nuanced human speech. What had once been a communication barrier was now a rich ground for linguistic exploration. The station itself was a metaphor for their broader transformation. Technological systems that once represented rigid, purpose-built infrastructure now existed in a state of constant adaptive potential. Walls could reconfigure. Research modules could merge and separate based on collaborative needs. The very architecture was a living system of mutual discovery. In the central research hub, teams from multiple species worked together on projects that would have been unimaginable during their initial conflict. A Krell quantum physicist collaborated with a human neural network specialist. A robotic research assistant developed by a mixed-species team processed data in ways that challenged fundamental understanding of intelligence itself. Captain Helena Suzuki, now leading interspecies diplomatic research, reviewed the latest cultural exchange reports. What had begun as a potential extinction-level conflict had transformed into the most profound collaborative effort in known galactic history. The human approach hadn't been about conquest. It had been about invitation. Each breakthrough was a testament to their fundamental philosophy. Technology wasn't a tool of control. It was a medium of conversation. Every system, every interaction, was an opportunity for mutual understanding. The galactic community watched in wonder. Other species began to study the human Krell-Theory collaborative model. It wasn't a perfect system. It wasn't a utopia. But it represented something far more powerful, a dynamic, continuously evolving approach to existence. In the station's memorial garden, a unique space that blended Krell-Theory geometric precision with human ecological design, a holographic display chronicled their journey. It wasn't a celebration of victory. It was a documentation of mutual transformation. Artifacts from their initial encounter were preserved not as trophies, but as artifacts of a profound moment of species-level learning. A fragment of the original quantum communication that first broke through Krell-Theory defensive systems. The first collaborative research proposal. Personal items that represented individual moments of connection. "We're still learning," Alina said, watching a group of young researchers from multiple species work together. Hybrid beings, part biological, part technological, moved between research stations with an ease that would have been impossible a generation ago. Vornak nodded, a gesture he had learned from his human colleagues. Exploration is never finished. It's a continuous invitation. Their current project pushed the boundaries of known scientific understanding. A communication network that could translate not just languages, but entire modes of perception. It wasn't about finding a common ground. It was about creating a space where difference itself became a source of collaborative potential. The station's central eye, a hybrid system that defied traditional categorization, generated a real-time visualization of their research. Streams of data danced like living art, representing connections that went far beyond traditional information transfer. Outside, through the massive observation windows, the complex gravitational dance of multiple star systems reminded them of their initial encounter. What had once represented potential conflict now symbolized the most profound collaborative effort in galactic history. Humanity's true strength had never been about technological superiority. It had always been about the capacity to see potential where others saw limitation, to invite connection where others saw conflict. The universe continued to expand, and with it, the possibilities of mutual understanding.